Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first talk of the Spotlight of 2025. This talk title, Non-Linear Part, The Shifts Between Modern and Contemporary. My name is Vipash Purichanont. I'm a curator and also teaching as a lecturer at Silpakorn universities. We will be talking about the modern, but then also the contemporary in the art making in Southeast Asia. And I would like to introduce you to our speaker first. We asked for curators to speak in this spotlight. So next to me is Tung, independent curator, and then also curator of Disconnected Contemporaries, which is the sections here in C-Focus this year. Also, Seng director of Curator Research and Exhibitions and a senior curator at National Gallery of Singapore. Next to him is Gridthiya Gaweewong, the artistic director of Thompson Art Center. And next to her is Sid Muhammad Hafiz, a curatorial consultant at Pahang State Museum Corporations in Malaysia. Before the talk, I asked everyone to present, also have a short presentations of their work, and then we'll be going into the discussion. So just to kick off, I will ask John to do his first presentations.
Thank you, Vipash.
You're welcome.
I actually made a really naughty deck of slides, but I was told that it was a little unprofessional. So they are not as naughty as I originally intended it to be. But I'll take this first 3 to 4 minutes that has been accorded to me to speak briefly about what inspired the curation behind this current edition of C-Focus, Disconnected Contemporaries. And the whole process really started about 10 months ago. And it started with a prompt from Emmy Yu, who is executive director of S.E.A, who said that, we should do something about the modern, and I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, that's interesting. That's something I can absolutely relate to. And I mined a lot of my own personal experiences in the development of the curatorial statement, which in turn became the invitation to artists and galleries to propose the artworks they are seeing in the presentation today. The starting point, I would say, in the development of the show was me connecting to my experience at the Singapore Art Museum when I really first started out there 10 years ago. And back then, I remember there was a demarcation between the collecting remits of the Singapore Art Museum and the National Gallery, and it was divided along a particular timeline. And 1990 was the year. And in some ways, 1990 was determined to be the year for working purposes, the year that the modern became the contemporary. And of course, this resulted in a plethora of challenges on a working level as well for curators who are collecting for the National Collection of Singapore. At times, curators from SEAM would have to go over to National Gallery and justify the collection of a particular work that was made in 1989, because the majority of the artist's practice had happened after the 90s. And I definitely recall Eugene and some of the other curators from National Gallery coming over to SEAM and saying that, can we get this work that was made in 1991? Because the artist kind of passed away in 1992. Most of his work was done in the 70s and 80s as well. And at the same time, I was also really thinking hard about how the man on the street responds to these two art historical terms, the modern and the contemporary. I think to the itinerant exhibition goer who is not a keen enthusiast on art history, to them the term is one and the same. But then again, at the same time, it's a term. There are terms that are loaded with significant connotations, and they do play a really big role in shaping the understanding of the artworks we sometimes encounter. We see the terms first before we actually encounter the works that these terms are associated with. And so it would not be unusual to, at times when you are in a contemporary art gallery, you're looking at a presentation of works that has been done very recently, to hear perhaps a little bit of a snobbish collector whispering to their friend on the side, oh, the works here look very modern, right? And so clearly there are certain sort of stylistic qualities, there are certain attributes, attitudes towards art making, certain materials that we are associating with these two time periods. And in many ways, the invitation to think about all of these ideas was simultaneously a provocation to think deeper about the entire act of historicization. I'm not saying that we should not be historicizing the works of art that have been made in recent times, but I think it's also important to wonder at what point do we start writing history? I think there's definitely a necessity to be constantly documenting, archiving, preserving, and researching. But the act of writing history itself, of drawing all of those connections, what is the right time to be engaging in such an activity? While it might seem strange to be asking this question about historicization, if we talk about archaeology, then the question is, at what point is digging a part of archaeology and not just digging? How far back must it be? So I think these are some of the important questions that I try to bring across over the course of this edition through the selection of artworks that we are presenting here. And to end on a personal anecdote, something that came up in the development of the project, I think the whole team tried really hard to have a really wide spread of artworks and artists that can basically illustrate the topic in question. And one of the artists which I wanted really badly to be part of the show was Wong Keen, because I felt that he brought together many attributes from both periods and had a practice that was in some ways bearing elements of Nanyang art in Singapore of the modern times, and at the same time he has remained extremely prolific even though he's 83 years old this year and very, very active. And we interviewed Wong Keen for one of the promotional materials, and what he said was, can we go to the next slide? Nope. No. Oh, it was showing so many times, right? Earlier. And now my only naughty bit is gone. The remote control is a traitor. This is a betrayal. There, Wong Keen, who said the contemporary is now. And next slide. Now means I am a contemporary artist. Next slide. If I'm alive. At 83 years old, I think it was amazing that Wong Keen was staking this claim, because for some artists who would be his age and who have passed away earlier, they might have already been lumped alongside with the modern by historians who are writing about their practice at the same time. So with that, I conclude my short little presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Presentation is out of my hand now, but I would like to ask Eugene to present for the next presentation, please.
Yeah, thanks, Vipash. So I was actually responding to the topic proposed by Vipash about non-linear paths, and I thought we should maybe have a discussion about time. And of course, when we think about the Greenwich Mean Time, right? The reason why we have a universalization of time was really through the need to build railways, as we all know, and we need to have a common time, right? But can we think, out of this kind of universalization of time into kind of multiple temporalities, different notions of time? So Elizabeth Friedman, she showed this image of the idea of synchronizing time into a universal time creates its own hegemony, right? You think about in militaries and how they synchronize their movements, right? But can we think beyond a kind of universal notion of time? Right, next slide, please. Yeah, so I'd like to introduce two texts. First, of course, very famous, very well known, Time and the Other, by Johannes Fabian, really an anthropologist. And what he proposed was really to think and critique how anthropologists work and to call for a certain coevalness of time, and whereby anthropologists and how they work with their subject, do not exist within the same time, right? And the subject is being locked in a kind of fixed, unchanging time, while the anthropologist works within the contemporary. So there is no kind of coevalness. And he called this out and said, hey, as anthropologists, can we, kind of work with our subjects, or interlocutors in a way that we have a certain coevalness of time. We exist within the same contemporary notion of time. And that led me to really discuss a book by Keith Moxey. He's really an art historian. And I really like a conversation between anthropologists and art historians. And he proposed, and he wrote this, he published this book, Visual Time, The Image in History. And he proposed really a different way of thinking about time. I think next slide. I should have another slide. Oh, sorry, previous slide. I think, yeah, okay, never mind. I have some bullet points, but they're not showing up here, so I'll just verbalize it. It's fine. And what he wanted to say was really how artworks produce their own temporalities, produces their own notions of or concepts of space, especially kind of immersive installations, and how that produces its own time. And I think that's interesting to kind of challenge the kind of universal notion of time. Next slide. Yeah, thanks, Vipash. So a bit of self-publicity in some ways, because this work is shown at the National Gallery Singapore. It's a work that we commissioned as part of our Light Tonight and Outbound. Outbound is an ongoing series of commissions whereby we commission artists to produce site-specific installations that respond to our spaces. It's mostly either in the Pahang atrium, so this is where it is right now, or it's at our Coleman entrance. So the moment you enter the National Gallery Singapore, you see one of our outbound installations. So this work was commissioned, and Kathleen Ditzik is the curator who worked with Art Labour, an artist collective. I'm sure many of you know Art, and they are here. Exactly, thank you. Gives me a bit of pressure. They produced this work, And in Cloud. And that got me thinking about visual time in many ways, because if we think about And in Cloud, and N is really a Jarai concept. And it's a Jarai concept that talks about the kind of a different cosmology. Right? And when we think about non-linear time or the non-linear pathways, I think we need to think about kind of different notions of time and modernities as kind of multiple modernities, not a single modernity. And when I encountered this work, it reminded me of Keith Moxey's visual time, because it's not possible to experience the work in one kind of perspective. If you think about a Western linear painting, a Western painting, there's always a linear perspective. It's a one single point perspective, a specific point in time which is fixed, right? And this installation, you can't experience it from one perspective. It demands multiple perspectives and multiple experiences of time produced by the installation due to its scale. And if you look at these, the pillars, there are 140 of them. They're all suspended. And it kind of resembles a cloud kind of descending a hill and into our Pahang atrium, which is, I think, amazingly poetic. And the Jarai people, there are about 400,000 of them, roughly, and they live in central Vietnam, which is the highlands. They're also being, displaced, since the 1990s due to the building of, or the starting of plantations, whether is it, coffee or, peppercorn or pepper, tea and so on, because it's very rich soil in the highlands. So there's a displacement of the highland peoples, the Jarai communities, and they're also Austronesian, right? And that's beautiful because it really does kind of communicate that sense of the need to look at it from different angles. If you go to the next slide, Vipash, thank you. You can see it also how they have worked with the Jarai community of artists, and they produce these sculptures. Some of them are funerary, but not all of them are. Some of them are not as well. And so it brings in a kind of Jarai kind of cosmology, whereby Jarai also means how kind of water evaporates into air. And so the idea of time being cyclical, so it's non-linear time, as well as within the Jarai kind of cosmology. which I thought really came out in this work, that also demands us to think of, all these pillars. So this is something that you would see in the plantations, which is, usually I think in this case for peppercorn. So the next slide. And what I really liked was really the hammocks. And the hammocks create another experience of time. And it's so popular because the moment we put up the hammocks, they are constantly being used. So it's wonderful. People kind of sit on it, and you kind of, have a little rhythm, and it creates another experience of time whereby you're able to see the work from bottom to up, right? Bottom to up. And again, there's a different temporality, right? A different experience of both space and time. Coming back to Keith Moxie's kind of thesis, of visual time, of artworks producing their own space and time. If you go to the next slide, previous slide, you'd see some of the bridges. So that's really another kind of experience of the work. If you go to the second floor and the third floor, we have bridges that kind of cut across and connects both the former Supreme Court and City Hall buildings. So you're able to see the work from kind of top to bottom as well. So there are really different perspectives that demands us to kind of work and think of time differently and space differently, kind of experience the work in different ways. And I think that really, helps us to think about how we can consider, multiple temporalities rather than singular notions of time. Thanks.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you. Can we go next to Hafiz, please? Yeah.
Yes, hi everyone. I actually want to thank John for sort of giving that context about the demarcations, the arbitrary timeline about the modern and contemporary, because as someone who has been implicated in both institutions, right, starting out at Singapore Art Museum and then going to National Gallery and then the Malay Heritage Centre, it brings back a lot of memories in the past 15 years, right? So I guess in terms of talking about linearity and notions of modernity, notions of contemporaneousness, a key component for me is the impulse, right? Whether it's the impulse from within myself as a curator for a particular show or an exhibition, or the impulse of my surroundings, whether it's an institution, whether it's a commercial gallery, whether it's working with a private museum. So in terms of how I, define, at least in my head, whether it's a modern art show, whether it's contemporary art show, it's always about trying to capture that impulse, right? And for myself, and I'm just speaking for myself, judging from this first picture, which was my last stint in Singapore before moving to Malaysia, was as a curator at the Malay Heritage Centre, an ethnographic museum located in Kampung Glam, not too far away from here, right? So I was, 2 years ago, sort of leading the revamp, trying to craft a storyline for, long story short, the history of the Malay Muslim society in Singapore, right? So conventionally, historically, Malay Heritage Centre has always been a more objects-based, artifacts-based museum. And then they bring in this art guy, right? And what else are they expecting him to do? Of course, I'm going to bring in some, contemporary artworks into that kind of setting, right? So, to their credit, they were open to it, by the very fact that they hired me in the first place. But, so this was the closing show before the museum actually closed for a major overhaul or a revamp. And at that point of time, I was just finishing off curating Karudin Wahab's solo show, and I was, sort of into, the, discussions with him about, anthropology, colonial images, pictography, and I gave him, Kai, the opportunity to respond to the objects list, the artifacts list that I was already amassing for the revamp. And so this painting, this image, of a tale from the Malay world was sort of his response to the artifacts, objects list that I had for the Malay Heritage Centre. And, he's known as someone who depicts a lot of the, the relationship between man and the natural world and all that. So it was just like an off the cuff sort of remark, have you ever exhibited your works outdoors, in the open, in the natural setting. And then he said, no. So I said, why not? We do it for this show, right? So even for the artist, it was something that he was sort of open to trying out. And for me, it was simply a way to start that conversation between, various impulses I was thinking about when I was tasked to lead the revamp, right? Whether it's history, whether it's the close relationship between the Malay world and the natural world, whether it's colonial archives, whether it's a decolonization of sorts in terms of trying to tell a particular community's history. So this was sort of the start of me getting more embedded into the crossing over or the overlaps between heritage, the craft world, and of course, the art, right? Next slide, Vipash, thanks. Yeah, and then somehow I landed up in the east coast of Malaysia, which is Pahang, right? I mean, admittedly, as a typical Singaporean, I'm still a Singaporean, coming to a year, being based in Kuantan. For a typical Singaporean, I mean, at least for me, the idea of the Malaysian art world is usually centered around KL, whether you like it or not, right? You have the national galleries, you have the commercial galleries, most of the collectors are based there. And when I was freelancing, I was busy going up and down KL all the time. And then, you sort of forget that Malaysia is a big place. I mean, Singaporean, typical island mentality, right? Everything is around here. So, and then I came across Pahang, which is of course the biggest state in peninsular Malaysia, right? And what do they have there? Like 2 years ago, they set up the MOCA, Museum of Contemporary Art in Kuantan. So when I first heard about MOCA, I'd be like, MOCA? Like you'd be thinking about the art capitals of the world, right? You wouldn't expect it to be in the east coast of Malaysia. Even Malaysians themselves, they were like, what, Hafiz, there's a MOCA in Malaysia? Where? KL? No, it's in Pahang. So even my friends in Malaysia, admittedly mostly in KL and Penang, they were like, what the hell are you doing in Kuantan, Right, yeah, so when of course when I came here, right, I mean the brief was to sort of re-energize and program and sort of start something at the MOCA, right? Because the idea of MOCA came first, the building came first, and then the rest later. That was my boss's thinking, I think. So the rest includes me right now, because now I have to think about how to make MOCA like a proper MOCA. So of course my first burden was, what is a proper MOCA, right? What is the collection? The collection is almost non-existent, except for some smattering of paintings, right? And then I said, when I came in, I said, so what's the first show? So the first show is of the Malaysian artist, who we known as a modernist, Syed, who was active, emerging in the 60s, 70s, post-independence. And I'm like, okay, contemporary art, and then post-independence artists, mostly paintings. And then when I go into the gallery, right, it's a colonial architecture, which is not too bad. And then I see this whole wall made of wooden sculpture, the one right in the middle, right? And then I say, what is that? Is that ID or is that meant to be a temporary fixture, or it's supposed to be installed? Oh, this is the wall of the gallery, and it's crafted by the master craftsman Nur Haizan from Terengganu. So he's like a national artist. In Japan, they have this, they call national treasures, right? So Nur Haizan is a national treasure in Malaysia for woodwork, who, unfortunately, tragically passed away last month. So I'm like, okay, there's modern art, contemporary art museum, and then you have the craftsman who sort of decorated the gallery. So it's like, whoa, it's like information overload, How do you frame this kind of show? So for me, again, it goes back to the impulse of the setting, right? The fact that it's a new institution, the fact that I'm in a place where the contemporary art scene or world as we, the converted ones, recognize is almost non-existent, right? And Vipash, maybe next slide. So I mean, this is not a promotion, but this is the landscape right now for me, right? So the Pahang museums, it's like National Heritage Board. They have a group of museums, right, everywhere, whether it's ACM, National Museum, But so for Pahang, they have, Ethnographic Museum, Mocha, and this upcoming Maritime Museum in this boat-shaped island around the river that's coming up on the left side. You can see that long, elongated building. You have the Ethnographic Museum, which is in the middle there, that colonial building, which used to be the Royal Palace. And then you have the Islamic Art Museum somewhere on the right side of the river. So there is a vision to turn this into what my boss, the management calls like a campus, the Museum Pahang campus, right? So these days, just to keep the story short, I'm coming in as a curatorial consultant, where obviously they know I'm the art guy, right? So how do I operate within this setting, right? And in a place where there's no fine art programs in the local universities, there's no art galleries, so to speak, in Kuantan, maybe 1 or 2 art framer shops in my 1 year of going around the city. So it's almost like, I'm not saying there's no art or artists, or but it's quite bare, it's quite minimal. So as I'm, to be honest, as I'm invited to this, I'm still processing in terms of how to sort of introduce, how to gradually sort of seep into this contemporary scene in Pahang, and maybe we can talk more about that later.
All right, thank you so much, Hafiz. Maybe the person that can talk about this is also Gridthiya, who's been running the Jim Thompson Art Centers.
Okay, thank
Please.
you. Sorry, I don't have any image to show, but I believe that many of you went to Jim Thompson Art Center and Bangkok, and also at the Jim Thompson House Museum. I'm working with this kind of setting, which is a combination of multiple time lapse and also, especially at Jim Thompson Museum, we are in the business of freezing time, and we keeping the memory, of the 60s when the owner, Jim Thompson, who's kind of secretly, mysteriously disappeared in Malaysia, not in Kuantan, but in Cameron Highland, and maybe he's somewhere in your museum. Sorry. I just want to keep you awake. Okay. The whole ideas of non-linear, like we are talking about the shift between modern and contemporary. In Thailand, I just met a new friend, curator from Spain. He said, oh, I went to the Museum of Contemporary Art, and then what did you see, right? So in Thailand, it's not what you expect, right? So everything that label one thing, you will get something else. So this is my warning, It means we also have mocha, but inside
I heard.
it's espresso. No, not espresso. It's something like Thai tea, with a lot of condensed milk.
Okay with tea? Okay.
But it's beautiful for me. I used to be like, and then at the end, when we teach students, it's kind of interesting. It's history, and we have to admit that this is our history, even though it's a trauma or the happy one. But this is our history, right? So we are not the same as you guys. Maybe we are lucky that we never have SAM or National Art Gallery, which means that we never start to demarcate and think about when is our modernist and when is our contemporary, because everything is always coexist. And we have to admit that. So from what I've been working in this setting, the Jim Thompson House Museum, and also with the Art Center, which we always do something that people who went to see the house, they never expect to see. For example, I have Gridthiya exhibition, which he kindly do something about textile, a lot of his work is about repair, right? And most of them is all about post-colonial and stuff like that. So for me, it's very interesting to work with that kind of coexistence, and especially when I was asked to do something in Chiang Rai, which where I come from. It's a city of only 700 years, younger than Hanoi, right? But how can we do something like this, in your context? We have about 300 artists who are very highly neo-traditional, and a very few, not few, like zero, only one person who in the international scene regard as a kind of contemporary artist, which is Angkrit, right? But we have to do something in that kind of context. So for me, it's bring me back to the time machine. The question that I ask is, how can I bridge that 700 years history and locality to be more relevant to today's context? Speaking about the concept of time, of course, in Thailand, we live in always dual time, meaning Buddhist time is totally cyclical, right? And the modern time is the linear time. So this is why we have a problem. The same as our political system, right? We always have dual system in one country. So every time that's why when you hear the news about Thailand has coup d'etat, how many times we have? 19, right? So we felt like it's normal because it will come back again. And you guys will hear the news soon that our government will be resolved, and then we have another election, and then we have another coup d'etat. Okay, so and then we have to go on the street to protest. So this is our cyclical time, in Thailand. But on the other hand, I mean, we trying our best to be more modern and progressive, but it's never success. So this is how the Thai artists, like these guys, they always have a problem. Like they don't really know their own what to do with their lives, so that's why they have to work with geckos, shit, and those kind of stuff. I mean, sometimes it was so difficult, to talk about superstructures, like the big story, grand narrative, because you're not allowed to, right? You have to really go back to your own kind of, story or your micro narrative. And I think that was quite interesting, to see something like that happening. So go back to the traditions, right? So for me, when you started to kind of demarcate what is modern, what is contemporary, I think these guys, they don't want to talk about the 90s, but I have to go back to the 90s. It's especially in Thailand. It's very important because many interesting stuff, happened during the 90s, like the Seng social installation, Montian Munma. But the way that they started to work and develop their own visual language, they pick up what is left 700 years ago, right? The trace, the runes and everything. And they create their own local visual language that can talk to global. For me, that was the beginning of our contemporary art, but I was wrong. So when we go back again, to look more in the history of the exhibition or institution, for example, what you did a show in NGS, right? The suddenly invisible. So we're talking about BRC Institute of Modern Art, which is started in the 70s. That for me, I think is the beginning, and it's almost the same, the way the Western kind of demarcate what is the beginning of contemporary art, which is the 70s, right? And we have a few artists, who went to, the West, and also, started to do something experimental, become the avant-garde, right? And this is only less than 1% of the country. And what about my craftsmen, and my people in the North, right? Are they still being considered as contemporary? Even though they were like disrupted, I mean, the work they've been continued the tradition, since 700 years, and they still practice. And they still do it here and now, right? So this is the question that I wanted to tackle, and until today. When I went to Chiang Rai, so that's why we bring all these guys together. So we invite like craftsmanship, from Chiang Rai to work with contemporary artists from Japan, from like everywhere, and the outcome is so interesting, because for us, we supposed to be never been colonized, right? And the way we use craft is different. from the way the post-colonial country artists use. For example, like people like, Indonesian, they use craft as a kind of resistance. So look what you guys did to me, and I want to kind of reclaim my tradition. In Thailand, we don't do that, So I don't think Montien have that kind of post-colonial kind of, idea of working with crafts. So I think his intention is just to bring what has been done in the past, and show it today. Yeah. So I want to stop here, and then we can answer your question
Thank
later.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yes, we have the mocha as well. I almost forgot about it. But I think,
It's not mocha.
it's not mocha, it's espresso. Yes. Yeah, so maybe the things that I just would like to have a discussions about is actually, before contemporary, let's focus on the modern a little bit more. Because last year we have this 2 big volume of a reader, modern in contemporary arts, modern in Southeast Asia art, right? And then I think that's kind of opened up quite a few possibilities, right? But then at the same time, it's feel like I think everyone has somehow needs to deal with the moderns in their practice anyway, even though it sounds very slippery. It can be time, it can be impulse, and then sometimes it's slipping away, especially from Thailand that we see. But maybe let's just focus and then talk about it a little bit. If you can define what is modern in your practice, please do. If you cannot define, I think you can also share how slippery it is, how fluid it is. Maybe can we start with something more, a place that is maybe more solid? Maybe John or Eugene can talk about it first, and then we'll just go a little bit back to Thailand and Malaysia context.
I think definitely Eugene is going to be better to answer this question, but
Yeah.
I'm going to
Contest.
I'm going to weigh in, and I'm just going to put in my 2 cents into this, which is that I really resonated with everything that Hafiz said, about having to deal with this smorgasbord of, and confluence of influences of craft, textile, this thing being made very long ago, this thing being made very long ago, but still being made now, things that are going to be made, and all of them coming together in a singular space, and therefore I sort of can't really put my finger on it exactly. Of course, if you want to go back to the textbook answers, then when we talk about the modern in Singapore, it's always this Nanyang art, coming up and up again. But as I tried to highlight, with the last 3 pictures in my slide, that was made really. Wong Keen's work was made fairly recently. He's still making works like that, and it's totally part of the present right now. So I can't really put my finger on that pulse of what exactly is definitive of the modern. I don't even want to say that it's Nanyang alone, because I know so little about everything else outside of the Nanyang that was happening in Singapore during that period of time, which I think Hafiz also knows a lot about. Yeah.
Well, it's it's very difficult to define the modern, I think, and that was the reason why I think Vipash brought out that we didn't use the term modern art. We use a much more slippery term, the modern. Right? And we can have a whole lecture about the difference between modern art, modernization, and modernity. But that is one whole lecture and maybe one whole book that we're going to talk about. But they're all, there are differences between each term. But we chose the modern. And I think it was for good reasons, because it was a much more expansive way to think about, to use the term multiple modernities. I mean, Jim Supangkat, the art critic and art historian in Indonesia, has published, widely on multiple modernities and how we did not think about the modern as one modern, so one universalizing hegemonic modern, which is usually Western-centric or Euro-American-centric, but multiple modernities that arise from very different kind of local and regional contexts, because we have different social, political, cultural conditions in different parts of the world, and all these different conditions must produce their own modernities, and therefore arise, different, multiple moderns, if one is to put it that way, and so it's a constellation of modernities or modern or the modern. And how, I think the challenge now is how we can map this constellation, how we can find connections between the different modernities that we experience globally. And I think on the other side, we cannot separate the modern from the contemporary. Right? So I think we need to see both as a continuum, but also to acknowledge the ruptures as well, at the same time. But I know Vipash, that's going to be your next question, so I will not elaborate on that now. I'll leave it at this.
Actually, can I ask like a follow-up question? And I'm curious about this because do you think that this disconnect and this challenge also exists because when we are thinking about this entire task of classification and sorting, it's because we're referring to moments, and that, of course, I'm going to invent a word here, something more like chirological time rather than chronological time, and there's like this huge disconnect between the two that we can't kind of get them in sync when we try to write, which is ultimately very, very linear in nature.
Absolutely. So if we can break out of a linear chronological time, and maybe, for example, if one is to borrow from the Annales school, right, the kind of Brodelian, Mediterranean, right, and you see Southeast Asia, as a huge ocean, as to see it as interconnecting archipelagos, right, so the kind of archipelagic logic, coming in. These are different ways that we can break out of these two, maybe not so helpful kind of terms, or, contingent devices, however you want to call them, of the modern and the contemporary.
Any response from?
Yeah, I was thinking. I mean, you mentioned oceans, right? Archipelagos and all that. It sort of reminds me about the project that we did together, Iskandar Jalil, Studio Potter, retrospective. So that was one of the first shows that inaugurated the opening of National Gallery Singapore, right? And I think we had quite a lot of fun doing the show with what I would say a conventional modernist studio potter, right? And I think one of the challenges for the show was to sort of think about how modern Iskandar's practice is and how is he relevant to the contemporary, which at that point of time was 2016, right? In this big institutional place. Right, so I think there were certain devices and strategies that we sort of employed, right, for the show. I mean, of course, it's a survey, so we had to sort of deal with the chronological thing, early works, later works, mid-career works, later works. But I think in terms of certain curatorial strategies, for example, having the artist, the 80-year-old artist working with a contemporary artist, a young artist, Gerald, in this case, to produce something new, right? I mean, that was one device that we sort of activated the contemporary aspect of that show. And also, I think in terms of display, in terms of exhibition design, wayfinding, sort of being a little bit cheeky in terms of like, directing the audience to certain cases of the works, right? So it makes me think now that there are our impulses, right? And when we are a curator dealing with an exhibition in a particular space, we are aware of all these, predicaments, prefaces and disclaimers that we tell ourselves, right? Okay, don't be too linear, contemporary, modern, doesn't really matter, impulse and all that. And then we have another set of nightmare when we try to write the exhibition essays, usually, right? With the looming deadlines, right? So I think in terms of, it really depends on again, like what I mentioned, your impulse, right? As a curator and the setting that you are in, right? Whether it's an institution where you might have some parameters that you have to operate within, and if it's a non-institution, if it's outside a private museum, private galleries where you sometimes have more spaces, more time to deal with this conundrum,
Anything, Hafiz? Anything from you, Hafiz?
I think, I always go back to Thailand case because we have only one book about Thai modern art, and it was really interesting to see how the writer, which is Ajahn Pinan, the way he started the concept of, modernity or the start of the modern art. He started from 19th century, which is like Rama IV, and also talking about Koen Kong, which is already one of the piece in the National NGS, the first room. Which I think is quite interesting, but and then when I was looking back again, who else do we have, and also what kind of characteristic that they define the ideas of modernness, and when did Thailand become modern, right? So but that kind of perception, it's slowly grow, but I kind of want to go back to refer to Bruno Latour that have we ever been modern, right? I think, and then he also says that, modernity is such a myth. And I totally agree with him. And for me, I see myself like, I'm totally like, I was postmodern before being modern, because I totally come from like supernatural, like animistic background, and then like, I was like, my family is a hardcore Buddhist, right? And I went to a Presbyterian school. So I just like, I really don't know both of them well. And then I became like animistic, it's much more interesting. And then nowadays, like contemporary artists, we know that modernity is the problem. So that's why we go back to this pre-modern. So and then I think to be more problematic, and we're trying to problematize the whole ideas of this binary, of being modern and contemporary. I challenge everyone, like we should be more like, make it more complicated and bring pre-modern in this equation and rethink about those, the whole ideas of like the coexistence of these, multiple time plus like, human-centric, non-human-centric, I think this is much more healthy, to just trying to demarcation. I think I will leave that for you guys because I'm not art historian. And I mean, my job is like,
There is one art historian.
Yes, and you also, yes, and it's your job, to and also David Tate, also think about when is the contemporary, when is the modern. Like this is not my question, okay? My question is, it's more like producing, like I help artists producing the work. That is my job. So I leave this to you guys to answer.
Okay, I give you a little bit of like my feeling toward the moderns. I always said it's like I always feel like it's a burden. In terms of like, it's a burden. At first, when I was studying, it was a legacy, something that you can, you need to take care of, you need to cherish. But then, at this point, it's a burden. It's something that you carry. But then at the same time, people kind of scared, not really unpacking it. People, sometimes evading it. Okay, of course, you can go to and say, we should be caring about the pre-modern as well. I agree. But then we also need to be consider like what is modern, and then that's going to go to another question I'm asking you guys, maybe to unpack a little bit more whether there is the questions of like what is the modern in the contemporaries, because I always find there always this baggage that we trying to escape, but then somehow we're not tackling it properly. That also goes to maybe not really a questions, but then at the same time, I find that if we can tackling it more beautifully, but then more honestly, then we can somehow, work with it more in terms of what is the modern, and what is the modern in the contemporary at the moment. So, if there is any response, please.
I'll try. And I use NN Cloud. Can we go to the image of NN Cloud? I don't know who's controlling the slides now, but Vipash, you are. Yeah. And I think NN Cloud collapses these.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, we can stay here. We can stay
Magic.
here. Yeah, because I think it collapses on the easy categorizations of modern and contemporary in this work. Because if you go to the next slide, Vipash, if I can have your help. Yeah. So they work with the Jarai community, right? And if you look at the sculptures produced by the Jarai community, they've been producing it for a very, very long time, right? And a lot of it is, of course, used as part of their funerary practices. And what Art Labor has done in a way, like what Hafiz was talking about, and how they collaborated with the Jarai community, right? So how do we categorize these sculptures? Are they modern? Are they contemporary? Right, exactly what Hafiz also, we discussed earlier, right? Because these traditions continue till today, and defy kind of categorizations of both modern and contemporary. And I think by them working and collaborating with them and showing and kind of being part of the entire concept, even in terms of the kind of bringing in the Jarai cosmology, right, which is again neither modern nor contemporary, right? Of Engin, the very term itself, it's part of the Jarayan kind of, because they are also animists like you, good, and because they are Austronesian, I like it because they're also matrilinear, so great, kind of like. Very good, and also Zomia, yeah. A big shout out to the late James C. Scott, right? And they live in the highlands, and that's where all the resistance happens against the lowlands, right? So it's great that they have brought it all together, and all these aspects of Indian Cloud challenges precisely what we're talking about today. How about do we call this? Is it a contemporary work? Maybe we think so, but it's more than that. Because if you ask the Jarai community, are you a contemporary artist? I'm not quite sure what their response is going to be. Maybe Art Labor can tell us. They're like, doesn't matter to them. They're all artists making works that they have, these sculptures that they have been making all this time. And so I think this work quite brings out a lot of the issues and questions that you want to tackle today. So please do see it. One other great thing about the work, if you go to the slide before, yeah, I must say this because we install this work at night. So tonight is also light tonight. So please do come and see. We open up the museum at night, and all these timbers, they actually vibrate. They vibrate according to the elements because this Padang atrium space has got wind that goes through from the front and the back because the doors open, those glass doors open, and therefore you see the timbers, these timber pillars, they vibrate. And there's a certain Jarayan, Jarai kind of cosmology as well, in terms of the vibration and movement of these pillars. And there is one pillar, I know because we installed this work at night, one pillar that vibrates more than others. So it's wonderful. There's this spiritual kind of cosmology that seeps into the work. Don't ask me why that particular pillar vibrates more, but it's very noticeable. Right? So after hearing from you, you have to see this work now. Yeah. Okay, don't spoil the magic. So it's magic, right? In the sense, of kind of animism. So I think this challenges a lot of kind of ideas about what we think about the modern and contemporary. Yeah.
Thank you. The other thing that I was thinking when Gridthiya was talking about Thailand have two terms, when you said it's like circular terms, but then there are also straight linear term in terms of modernities. That I think it's getting mixed up a lot, and that it's become a S-curve. The way in which Thailand kind of work is like it's going like a S-curves, traveling on, and so I'm wondering we have many models of understanding. Of course, we have this titles non-linear parts, and then we have for example, when we talk about time, and then Thailand is also going this way. With your Eugene's model is more like cosmological terms, right? At the end, I think last question will be on the contemporaries and then its connection to Southeast Asia, because at the same time, I think we also responding in talking about Southeast Asia. So last year I got a pressure to actually talk to younger curators about their practice, and then the other thing is sense of space seem to change as well. We have been talking about time, but the last question will be about space. So there seem to be, because it may be the disruptions of the COVID-19 and then people getting more online, and then they're also popping up of this kind of Zoom residencies and all those things. I think the idea of a solid geological space somehow got softened, but maybe not disappear yet. But then it's quite, or as an art historian, you also need to look forward, no? So this is forward-looking, saying what you can see in terms of the space, what you can see is maybe in the category of Southeast Asia? Are you seeing it all connected firmly, similarly with time, or are you seeing it changing, maybe changing in the future?
I would like to attempt to answer that, or at least share a bit of my thoughts about that particular question, because it's something that's been really close to my heart and my own research interest for a very long time. And I think since we worked together on 2019 Singapore Biennale, you're really familiar with this. And I've always been very interested about how do we constitute the region? And this question was really on the forefront of my mind when I was doing my postgraduate studies, because up until then, my entire life was built on this notion that Southeast Asia has 10 countries, and in, 1999, Southeast Asia was, ASEAN was completed, Southeast Asia was completed because all of the 10 countries are now, member states of ASEAN. It is the end of the story. And then, when I started doing my postgraduate studies and started looking closer at maps, then you start to realize that, wait a minute, Papua New Guinea is not Southeast Asia, even though the other half of that landmass is Southeast Asia because it's West Papua. And then Timor-Leste became independent, became observer in ASEAN, but until now hasn't really joined. So I'm not sure if their Southeast Asia still gave me a little bit of problems when we did the Singapore Biennale. And, in trying to push this little agenda, I had two works that were presented by non-Southeast Asian artists in Sea Focus. One of them is Lin Ao Jie, the other one is Shilpa Gupta. The curatorial rationale was that, we're talking about Southeast Asia, and so I just, have a smattering of a Southeast Asian artist and an East Asian artist to contextualize the reason. But actually, I think the real reason was because I really wanted to show Lin Ao Jie's piece, which was a map, of Asia, and it has a dragon on it from China, kind of reaching its long arms into Southeast Asia. But what was more interesting is how he demarcated Southeast Asia. He drew a line that is completely different from what ASEAN is. And I felt that it was a mirror to the question that I posed in Singapore Biennale 2019. When we constitute a region, are we doing it sheerly through, is it purely an act of political will? Or are there historical precedents? Are there geological precedents? Are there botanical and zoological precedents? And with Lin Ao Jie's map, he drew Guangzhou into Southeast Asia. And it was over the course of a dinner we were having chicken rice that I kind of understood why he drew Guangzhou into Southeast Asia. And in essence, it was, I'm always looking at Southeast Asia and it's really exciting, but because Southeast Asia regards me as a Chinese artist, right, I cannot get involved in Southeast Asian exhibitions. So if I were to redraw the boundaries of Southeast Asia to include Guangzhou and not the rest of China, now I can be part of Southeast Asian exhibitions. And so maybe in some ways I made his wish come true by, putting his work there. But I think the main point which I wanted to drive at is that I think in constituting a region, a lot of it has got to do with relationships on the ground, on a personal level, between people, by whatever name you want to call that region. I think that matters a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not giving up drawing the line in a way, no? You still...
I think you can draw many lines, and you can draw many overlapping lines at the same time. And the issue is that we want to concretize one particular line that we draw as everything, as the definitive, which is the issue. Yeah, it's the definitive.
Okay, I'll give you the academic answer, which is quite an easy one, because go read Heather Sutherland. And she has a wonderful historiographic kind of thinking about what is Southeast Asia. Exactly, John, what you're asking. And Heather Sutherland, basically, I think she took a position. She was thinking about the Annales School and Brodel's The Mediterranean, and trying to think about how we can think of Southeast Asian as a kind of a Mediterranean. connecting oceans. And I think eventually, the final conclusion is that Southeast Asia is not a geographical concept. So if you're going to use a map, you're not going to go anywhere. That's my opinion. You can draw whatever maps, and in the end, it's not going to help because it's not a geographical concept. It is more of a contingent device. A contingent device meaning it's a conceptual tool, and how you want to use it, how you want to look at cultural, historical connections that connect the region, right? Whether it's through trade, whether it's through cultural exchanges. I know some people don't like the word exchanges, cultural, because too capitalist, cultural interactions, cultural transfers, right, that take place within the region and in regions beyond it. So good luck to the artist who wants to draw a map. That's my academic kind of response to that. But it's really a contingent device, so yeah. We can do one whole book on this, by the way, in that question.
Can I have a last word on
Yes,
Southeast
please.
Asia?
Yes, please.
I think it's totally a kind of political constructed, right? And within Southeast Asia, who needs Southeast Asia more than Singapore? None. None. Okay. Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, we were so busy with our own. We have no time. We have no time. Our artist has no time to make a dictionary of Southeast Asia, like Ho Seung Yan. And if you want to know more about this, go to Bangkok. We're gonna have his talk at Jim Thompson on Tuesday. Okay, thank you.
Actually,
Yeah.
I think Timor-Leste might need Southeast Asia more than Singapore needs Southeast Asia. That's why I'm still trying to join.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect ways to end the sessions, but I think the conversation just begins. So, like after this, feel free to have, your ongoing conversation afterward. I'd like to thank the organizer, thanks all the speakers today. Tomorrow we have another talk, not us, but there will be another talk at the same time. And then today, after this, there will be a tour of the Sea Focus as well. So thank you very much for this evening. Thank you. This afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Vipash.